For now, though, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. We are very happy to have occasional Skype presentation as part of our Brownbag lecture series. And this semester we have two. We earlier had Professor Keres Schenk, who is an American now teaching at the Nazarbayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. And today we have one of our own, a recent REES MA alum, John Stanko, who graduated in May and is now working in Russia. Hi, John.
Hi, hello.
Hi, good to see you. So, in the order of getting things started, we will go ahead and yield the floor to you, and we look forward to hearing about your observations, and hopefully we'll have good discussion.
Yes,
The floor is yours.
So, since greetings from Moscow, first off, if I cut out at any point and you don't hear something I say, just let me know so I can repeat it. My internet connection is not the best at the moment because it is snowing out. Yay, Russian winter.
Well, we only had snow here too, quite heavy. Campus was closed yesterday, so we can relate.
Excellent, then you probably have more snow than us right now. So I'm going to talk today about my time this summer in Irkutsk, Russia. I went there as part of a Fulbright-Hays Group Projects Abroad program. And I wanted to look at why Russian students choose to study Chinese, and conversely, why Chinese students decide to study Russian. So I am a CREES MA grad. I just finished up in May. And my capstone for my master's was on Russia-China relations, and in general, my studies focus on foreign policy. I also have an interest in education and how education sort of fits into the IR discipline. So when I had the opportunity to do a project in addition to language abroad, I decided that I would try and look at the reason why students choose to study either Russia or China, respectively. For those of you who may have seen the original version of the announcement, which said that I was going to look at Russian students' attitudes towards Chinese immigrants, unfortunately, as this was a Fulbright-Hays grant, and we were not allowed to do anything political, that got nixed pretty soon after the program started. So this was the secondary aspect of that original project, and it became my actual project. So why Irkutsk in particular? Well, because that's where the program. So Irkutsk being in Siberia and having that history as a waypoint on Russian journeys to China way back in the early days, it has this history of connecting Russia and China. It's also, the city geographically is closer to Beijing than Moscow. And Irkutsk State University, where I was studying and students, it's actually, they're celebrating their 100th anniversary year, 2018, and their Chinese language program started the next year. So they have a long history of China studies, working with Chinese universities and building the knowledge in Russian. And of course, there's Lake Baikal in Irkutsk, and I always wanted to go there, and this was a great excuse. So this is sunset on Irkutsk, or on Baikal, and was well worth it, and I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't had the chance to go see Baikal. So the project, the background info, so you know kind of going into this what to expect. So as I said, this was a Fulbright-Hays Group Projects Abroad program, so I was part of a group, which meant that my project, while I was able to choose the theme and sort of how I wanted to approach it, I still had to make sure it fit in with the overall group project, because we had to present in Russian at the end of the summer, and we had to show that there was a thread. The program itself they emphasized more interviews and practicing Russian language more so than the project in and of itself. So there were some limits, and this wasn't as grand an undertaking as I would have hoped, but it was still an interesting experience. So my group, as you can see here, was Contemporary Irkutsk, which was a pretty broad catch-all category. So we had Russian in Mississippi. She looked at Siberian cuisine, specifically looking at your Theo looked at Putin and his legacy as a writer from the region. And kind of what sounds you can associate with the city. And Emily looked at how tourism has affected the city. Mine was kind of the black sheep of people who were looking at higher education. Was a survey. This was done as a survey. What it was not a large hand survey. As you can see, there were about 25 responses in total. Again, because this was done as a language study program as well as a project-based program, it wasn't the same as if I just got to Irkutsk to do some research. I had to do research around going to class, 4 hours, going on excursions, going on expeditions, for example, to Baikal or to a laundry day. So, again, do not expect a dissertation here. So this was a survey of current students of Irkutsk State University, and I asked both Russians and Chinese students. The survey, I'll talk a bit more about this in a second, distributing. So the survey itself was entirely in Russian because, again, this was about practicing Russian. But the nice thing here, and I'll provide a link at the end, we had to create a digital version. So we created a website. And you can see on here are both the Russian version, and we also had to create then an English version. So everything I'll be showing you today is in English so that everyone knows what I'm talking about. So you can see here some things like why Irkutsk State, why Chinese, how long have you been studying, what interests you outside of the language. Because the main thing that I wanted to look at is whether students are just choosing to study either Chinese or Russian for these pragmatic economic reasons. So on the Russian side, are they just saying, I can get a job if I know Chinese? And more on the Chinese side saying, well, it's much cheaper to study in Russia than to study in China. And the secondary query was looking at, with the growth of Chinese migration into Irkutsk, because again, I couldn't do an overtly political. So instead I asked how much does Chinese culture influence the city? And does it feel at all in any places like it is Chinese? So this was done in a survey version, and it was sent by email because, of course, I was there during the summer, and right as we were getting there, most students were taking their final exams and then leaving either to go home or to go abroad on holiday. So what I did was I contacted, there was a student I was put in touch with who studies Chinese and law, and she offered to send the survey to her cohort of, I believe, 22 students in total. So I received 13 responses back. And then for the Chinese students, I actually befriended a student who's been studying at Irkutsk State for 3 years. So his Russian is actually better than mine. So I asked him to spread the survey, to disseminate it to other Chinese students studying Russian at ISU. And before it was sent out, of course, because I'm not a native Russian speaker, it was checked by both our grad student mentor and our resident director, who is a native Russian. And I also had aforementioned Chinese, but cultural standpoint that everything was scandal, nothing was kind of in terms of wording. And here I just have, so this is a sign for the green line, which is just the tourist line. So tourists, you don't even have to really even speak Russian or English. If you draw up all these signs, there's around the Duma, classic cathedrals, all the major parts of the city in the center. But I noticed almost immediately, we did a tour of the Green Line on our first day of classes, and you can see here you have, to my eye, is that it's also in Chinese. And I was told that is a relatively recent development in the last probably 7 years, is that signs have started to be trilingual, not just Russian and English, but also because of more Chinese tourists and permanent residents, signs being in Chinese. So now for the more interesting part, the actual responses. So this is easier for me to actually show you the chart than to just have you imagine it. So the bolded answers are specifically economic reasons. So it's relevant in the job market, relevant. And also, again, note, so the survey was in Russian, and the responses is originally in Russian. These are I was required to then translate everything into English. And I apologize, there's a typo there, so just ignore that. But yes, so a lot of the prospect. But then you have things like it's a prestigious language, and again, this is Russian students talking about why they're studying Chinese. Interest in contemporary culture of China. This one to me was interesting, saying Chinese is one of the most complex and unusual languages in the world, and I have the challenge. This one I laughed when I saw it. My parents forced me. I'm sure there are students who can relate to not having a choice in what they were going to study. But there again, you have the Chinese is so much different from European languages, and it's this new experience. So what you have is, yes, you have students who said there are economic reasons. I want a better job, I want to earn more money. But that was 6 of 13 respondents. On the other hand, you also have the actual majority of students pointing to the complexity of the Chinese language, wanting to challenge themselves, in being interested in Chinese culture, or of course the other, just I didn't have a choice. So, moving, this is, you'll see in a moment why I'm laughing. So, the Chinese student responses, again, taking into account that there is the possibility, because Russian is not, of course, their first language, it's a foreign language that they're studying. So, you have the possibility of misinterpretation, but reading the answers, I did not get the impression that the students didn't understand what I was asking, but they did certainly give some unexpected answers. So, for example, because I love Russian guys, they are tall and beautiful. And these are Chinese students' reasons for studying Russian. The talk of Russian culture. So you have students who want to study Chinese culture, and here you have the reverse of Chinese students wanting to study Russian culture. This is one that I suspect may have been misinterpreted. The answer was prosta. I don't know if they meant because the language is simple, or just they're saying the answer is simple. That one, I'm not sure how to interpret.
I would actually say that this is just because.
So just simply because, just because?
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, that one, I didn't want to get too in depth on giving my own interpretation to it, so I just left it. You have Russian is the most beautiful language on earth. It is certainly a very, very nice language. This one I found quite interesting. Saying, I believe this was a female student, and she talked about she knew that the World Cup, of course, was going to be held in Russia in 2018. And so she actually started learning Russian 3 years ago, so that by the time 2018 came around, she would be able to go to Russia and go to the World Cup and see the games and not be dependent on anyone was here during the World Cup. Went to any of the major airports. I'm sure you saw the nice young folks wearing the red volunteer jersey so that they could direct people trying to find their way who didn't speak Russian. So that was a very interesting reasoning. And this one, for me, sort of resonated because he talks about how this was actually much longer than the original. I had to shrink it just to take with it. He just happened to meet somebody from Russia who had come to China, and the guy told him about Russia and his home, and the student decided, well, this sounds like a cool place, I'm going to go there. For those of you who don't know, the reason I chose Russian is not because I thought that Russian is a beautiful language, or that Russian guys are tall and beautiful, or Russian women are tall and beautiful. It was because I didn't want to study a traditional language. So in my junior year, I asked my advisor, what are my options if I want to study something other than Spanish or German or French? And she told me, you can do Japanese or Russian. Japanese was at 10 a.m., Russian was at 11 a.m., and I wanted an extra hour of sleep. So that's how I started on Russian. Of course, then I thought, this is really cool, the case system, the word order. So I stuck with it, and of course ended up doing my master's, and I might eventually go on to a PhD, but not yet. For now, I'm content to just stay. This idea it was just something random that drew me into starting learning this language, and then I've been doing it for 3 years and studying in Russia. There is one student on here who said, I want to earn more. But other than that, it is a wide variety of just attention that you may have seen. There are 2 students here who, just, in their opinion, Russian is Russian. As someone who is studying Russian, I'm not sure I agree, but to each their own. I also asked, going back to the survey, why specifically Irkutsk State University, why Irkutsk? And it was basically a split between students saying because Irkutsk State has a good reputation for language programs, which it does. It has its own campus for the language school, which is where I was studying for the Russian language. But the other reason is because, as I mentioned, Irkutsk State has these French universities. So some students simply said, if they wanted to study abroad, they're So that was more where the pragmatic decisions came in, was going specifically to Irkutsk and not necessarily want to study Russian. The second very clear, as I mentioned, the Chinese influence. I think it's fair to say that both Russian and Chinese influence, and probably one that's been growing more recently. They pointed to, as I mentioned earlier, the prevalence now bilingual signs, a lot of signs that are in Russian and Chinese, of advertisements just walking down the street, the main street, actually Karl Marx Street, and just having an advertisement. It's not even.
John, you froze. Can you hear us? John?
The Russian. hear me?
We had a bit of a break, but
Okay.
you go back.
Okay, I could hear you. What was the last thing that I said?
You started going down Karl Marx Street and signs
Okay.
that were in Chinese and Russian.
Yes, okay, so thank you. But just, yeah, going down Karl Marx Street and seeing sign entirely in Chinese. There are a lot of Chinese restaurants, even on the central square, and not like, fast food Chinese restaurants, authentic Chinese food. My Chinese friend actually took me to the city near the family I was staying with, and it was lovely, a floor view of the Angara River. It was also very expensive, but it's basically a tourist hotel where it's owned by a businessman, and it's mostly it's rich. It's usually rich tourists. They come in, they stay in the hotel, and I could see them, going past my road in their Land Rovers on their way out to Baikal, possibly further along a day on expeditions, and yeah, which has also been something that's been growing. And then on the outskirts of town, there's a large flea market for the sake of this. Basically, stalls, almost entirely Chinese merchants selling Chinese goods, usually knockoff edges and that sort of thing. And a lot of the Chinese students said that when they went there, they felt almost as if they were in China, because it is, you're speaking Chinese to Chinese either citizens or former Chinese citizens. But what both camps, if we'll call them that, agreed was that while there is a growing Chinese influence, which can also be seen along Lake Baikal, if there's Chinese citizens who have been buying land and actually developing along Baikal, but that's a whole other topic that would also be an interesting discussion. But the city itself, while there's this growing presence of the Chinese language, there's not as much of the Chinese culture. It's still very much a Russian city. You can see that they're the Chinese diaspora. Am I still there? I mean, my internet connection is unstable.
Okay, you are there. There have been occasionally a fraction of a second your voice disappeared, but we got what you were saying.
Okay, thank you. So luckily we're coming to the end here, wrapping up. So the main takeaway, in my opinion, from my point of view, was that students aren't deciding to study either Russian or Chinese primarily because they're looking at it from this pragmatic, I can make more money or I can spend less money to get an education. There are these more, shall we say, personal motivations that are encouraging students, culture or interest in the language itself, that are driving students to say, I'm going to study Russian or I'm going to study Chinese. And again, looking at this from more of the international relations aspect, it's, to me, probably a good sign for the Russian and Chinese governments who have been trying to build educational cooperation. And keep in mind, this is a very small end study. This is by no means a comprehensive or definitive study, but it's a start that points to the possibility that Russia and China, instead of only focusing on the hard sciences, can also use education in more soft power, looking at the soft sciences, the social sciences, culture, literature, linguistics. So I think it offers a pathway to building further cooperation and not only having to say, well, we need more scientists. It's not that we need cooperation on the scientific front, to actually then expand it to say, we can have educational cooperation and we can attract students in all disciplines. So I think that's it. I'll keep this reasonably time, so we'll leave time for questions. I can also, during questions, I can talk more about my experience in Irkutsk side of the project. And here is the website for the group as a whole. And there's both an English version and a Russian version. So thank you very much for your attention. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
No worries. Let's give John a round of applause, please. Thank you, John.
Certainly.
All right. Questions for John?
Okay.
Yes, Amanda.
Hi, John. Did you have a chance to find out where in China these students were coming from? Were there specific cities or parts of the country that you noticed people coming from?
Dr. Chernetsky, I'm going to need you
yes,
to...
so Amanda's question is, was there any specific regional distribution of the Chinese students where the students from particular regions of China represented more than of some others? Or particular cities?
I would say probably more from the Northeast, of course, from the Northeast, but there wasn't really a specific distribution. Again, some of it just depended on which universities Irkutsk State has that partnership with. But yeah, I don't have a specific thing. I can tell you the Russian students in general were all concentrated in Irkutsk and Ulan-Ude. Like the students going to Irkutsk State were staying locally. For most of the Chinese students, this was, I believe, their first time abroad. And some of the Russian students had been abroad, others hadn't. ISU actually, in the third year for the Chinese studies program, you're required to go abroad, so most students go to Harbin. So I can't definitively say. I would say probably, if I had to say, more the Northeast, the closer towards.
Okay, you froze again, I think.
No.
All right. Actually, for the following up on this, did you have yourself a chance to go to China, or no? You just had to stay on the Russian side of the border?
No, unfortunately, we were on single entry visas.
Okay.
So while some host families encouraged us to go to Mongolia because that would actually have been the closest foreign border, none of us wanted to see how strict the border security was. So I may do so now that I'm working here and I have a multi-entry work visa. I might try to make it out there if I have some time, maybe during the holidays or in June before I have to leave. But no, it was all had to stay inside the country.
Actually, now that you mentioned that you right now are working in Russia, would you say that the summer program you were on was beneficial for you in terms of then finding a work opportunity in Russia?
I would definitely say that for a couple of reasons. Being in the country and having the intensive lunch program, which you can study in the U.S., but at a certain point you have to be using it every day. It was useful to get used to some of the customs, the cultural perks, if you will, in a smaller city of 600,000, as opposed to figure it out Moscow. So like the aversion to giving change. So like if I took a 1,000 ruble bill, the cashiers in Irkutsk would always look at me funny and say, "Menshi bude?" No, I do not have anything smaller. It's only 1,000 rubles. But also having to get used to taking public transportation, which of course is much bigger here than in the US. So that was something of having to take the marshrutka every day to get to campus. When in Moscow, I have to either take a bus or take the metro. So getting used to public transportation, again, in a smaller, more compact city was definitely useful. And also, honestly, just meeting Russians and being able to ask them, how do I do this in Russia? Like, how do I get the little store card? So actually, yeah, just meeting people, having to use Russian, it was definitely helpful. And then going to applying to jobs and saying, yes, I just spent the summer in Irkutsk on a Fulbright program. I think I can handle myself coming to Moscow.
More questions from the audience? Okay, one more question from me. What did you find the most surprising, the most unexpected thing during the summer program, either in your research project or just in general being there?
Hold on, it broke up a little there.
Okay, what did you find the most surprising or the most unexpected during your experiences in Russia over the summer, either with this research project or in general?
The most interesting thing, my first thought is to say the Hare Krishna band that they go through the street, the main street of Irkutsk, and play. But that was just something that was really nice. The most surprising, I think, honestly, just that after probably only a couple weeks, is I started to feel like I wasn't in a foreign country. That it felt a lot like, yes, everyone around me speaks Russian, but I go home, I go in the fridge, I get food, I go to the store, I buy food, I take a walk. It really didn't feel like a foreign country much quicker than I thought. And I've noticed the same thing here. Going home for a month after Irkutsk and then coming back to Russia, coming back to Moscow even, and being in a whole new city, it quickly feels like home. It just doesn't feel strange very quickly.
My personal curiosity, which part of Moscow do you live in? Which neighborhood?
So I'm by Akademicheskaya.
Okay.
So I forget if that's Akademicheskaya, but yeah, I'm south of the South City Center.
Yeah. So, but it's a very nice neighborhood actually.
Yes.
Speaking of having studied at the university there and lived obviously in the dorms. Any final chance for questions from the audience? If not, let's give John another round of applause. It's wonderful to see you. Stay warm in Moscow and keep doing good things and letting us know about good things that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay.